Welcome, history enthusiasts, to our new series, exploring the lives of Rome's most enigmatic emperor. Today, we begin with a figure often misunderstood, a man who lived his life in the shadow of giants, before reluctantly taking the throne himself. His story is one of political intrigue, family drama, and the immense pressure of power. This is the story of Tiberius. Let's rewind the clock to 42 BCE. The Roman Republic is in turmoil, racked by civil wars following the assassination of Julius Caesar. In the midst of this chaos, a child is born into one of Rome's most ancient and proud families. His name is Tiberius Claudius Nero. His father, also named Tiberius Claudius Nero, was a respected senator and a staunch supporter of the Republic. His mother was the intelligent and beautiful Livia Drusilla. From birth, Tiberius was a true blue-blooded Roman aristocrat, destined for a life of privilege and public service. But destiny, as he would soon learn, is a fickle thing, especially in Rome. The political landscape of Rome was shifting like sand. The second triumvirate composed of Octavian, Mark Antony, and Lepidus held power, but their alliance was fragile. Tiberius's father had initially sided with Mark Antony against Octavian. This choice had dire consequences. When Tiberius was just a toddler, his family was forced to flee Italy, escaping the proscriptions and political purges instigated by Octavian. Imagine a young boy, not even 3 years old, on the run, his family's safety hanging by a thread. They sought refuge in Sicily and then Greece, living as political exiles. These early years of uncertainty and danger undoubtedly left a deep impression on the young Tiberius, shaping his cautious and often somber demeanor in the years to come. Then, in an astonishing turn of events, a political amnesty was declared. The family returned to Rome, but their lives were about to change forever. A political reconciliation was brokered, and it came at a very personal price. Octavian, the very man who had forced them into exile, met Livia Drusilla and was instantly captivated by her. The attraction was mutual and politically convenient. Despite Livia being pregnant with her second child, and both she and Octavian already being married, a divorce was swiftly arranged. In 38 BCE, Livia married Octavian, just days after giving birth to her second son, Drusus. Suddenly, young Tiberius, now 4 years old, found himself with a new stepfather, the most powerful man in Rome, the man who would soon become the first Roman emperor, Augustus. Imagine the psychological impact on a young boy. His father was pushed aside, and his mother was now married to his family's former enemy. He and his younger brother Drusus went to live in Octavian's house. While this move secured their safety and future, it placed Tiberius directly into the complex and often perilous world of the imperial court. He was no longer just a child of the Claudian clan. He was now a stepson to the future ruler of the Roman world. He grew up surrounded by immense power, but he was always on the periphery, an outsider within the inner circle. His biological father passed away when he was just 9, further cementing his place within Augustus's household. Life in the home of Augustus was a constant performance. Tiberius was raised alongside Augustus's own biological daughter, Julia, and his chosen heirs, his nephew, Marcellus, and later, his grandsons, Gaius and Lucius Caesar. These were the golden children, the direct descendants of Augustus, groomed from birth to carry on his legacy. Tiberius, in contrast, was the reserved, serious stepson. He was diligent, intelligent, and an accomplished military commander in his own right, but he lacked the easy charm of the others. He was always seen as a backup, a spare part in the grand imperial machine. He was constantly being compared to the emperor's preferred successors, and often found wanting in Augustus's eyes. This environment fostered a deep-seated sense of duty in Tiberius, but also a profound resentment. He was expected to serve the state and the family, to put their needs above his own, but he rarely received the same level of affection or recognition as Augustus's blood relatives. He was a pawn in Augustus's grand dynastic plans. For instance, Augustus forced Tiberius to divorce his beloved wife, Vipsania, with whom he was deeply in love, and had a son, to marry his own daughter, Julia. This was a purely political move to bring Tiberius closer to the line of succession after another heir had died. The marriage was a disaster, and Tiberius was heartbroken. He was commanded to sacrifice his personal happiness for the good of the state, a theme that would dominate his entire life. Growing up in the shadow of Augustus and his favorite heirs taught Tiberius to be cautious, to hide his true feelings, and to navigate the treacherous currents of court politics with a quiet, watchful eye. He was a man of immense capability, a brilliant general who secured Rome's northern frontiers, but his successes were often downplayed or credited to the glory of Augustus. He was a Claudius, proud and traditional, forced into the world of the new Julian dynasty. This constant tension between his heritage and his circumstances, between his personal desires and his public duties, forged the complex character of the man who would, against all odds and perhaps against his own wishes, eventually become Rome's second emperor. The boy who was born during the Republic's death throes, who became a fugitive as a toddler, and was then thrust into the heart of imperial power, was shaped by these powerful forces. His childhood was not one of simple, aristocratic leisure, but a masterclass in survival, duty, and disappointment. These early experiences are crucial to understanding the ruler he would become. Reserved, efficient, and deeply suspicious. The stage was set, not for a glorious rise to power, but for a reluctant ascent, driven by fate and the ambitions of others. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the early life of Tiberius. The story is far from over. Next time, we'll explore his military career and the series of tragedies that unexpectedly cleared his path to the throne. If you've enjoyed this video, please give it a like, subscribe to our channel, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss the next chapter. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Until next time, stay curious. Welcome back to our series on the life of Emperor Tiberius. In this chapter, we delve into a childhood far from ordinary, a world of chaos and uncertainty that would forge the man who would one day rule Rome. Imagine being a toddler, not playing with toys, but on the run, a fugitive from the most powerful men in the world. This was the reality for young Tiberius Claudius Nero. His story begins in 42 BCE, a year of turmoil. The Roman Republic was tearing itself apart. The assassination of Julius Caesar had unleashed a bloody civil war, and Tiberius's father, also named Tiberius Claudius Nero, had made a fateful choice. He sided with the assassins, Brutus and Cassius, against Caesar's heir, Octavian, and the formidable Mark Antony. It was a gamble that would cost his family dearly. When Octavian's forces emerged victorious, Tiberius's father became a wanted man, an enemy of the state. The family was forced to flee Rome. For the next 2 years, the infant Tiberius was a refugee. His parents dragged him from city to city, first to Sicily, then across the sea to Greece. These were not leisurely travels. They were desperate escapes. Imagine his mother, Livia, clutching her son, constantly looking over her shoulder, never knowing if the next town would offer sanctuary or betrayal. Ancient sources tell dramatic tales of them hiding in caves and narrowly escaping capture. While these stories might be embellished, the core truth remains. Tiberius's earliest memories were steeped in fear and instability. He learned from infancy that the world was a dangerous place, where political winds could shift in an instant, turning powerful families into outcasts. This wasn't just a political lesson. It was a visceral, personal reality that settled deep into his young mind. Just when it seemed their exile would be permanent, the political landscape shifted once more. In 39 BCE, a fragile truce was declared, and a general amnesty allowed political exiles, including Tiberius's family, to return to Rome. But for young Tiberius, the return home brought a different kind of upheaval, one that would be even more formative. His mother, Livia, was not only intelligent and ambitious, but also stunningly beautiful. She caught the eye of the very man who had once hunted her family. Octavian was utterly captivated. What happened next was a scandal, even by Roman standards. He was married, and Livia was not only married but also 6 months pregnant with her second child. Yet, Octavian's desire was law. He divorced his own wife and compelled Tiberius's father to divorce Livia. Just 3 days after she gave birth to Tiberius's brother, Drusus, Livia married Octavian. At the tender age of 3, Tiberius was thrust into a bizarre and complicated new family. His father was now a sidelined political figure, while his mother was the wife of the most powerful man in Rome. His new stepfather was the man who had driven his family into exile. The psychological impact of this must have been immense. Tiberius and his brother Drusus were initially raised in their biological father's house. Imagine the confusion for a young boy, shuttling between the home of his defeated, embittered father and the glittering, powerful household of his mother and stepfather. He was a living reminder of a past Octavian wanted to forget, a relic of a political alliance that had failed. This dual existence created a deep-seated conflict. He was a Claudius, by birth a member of one of Rome's oldest patrician families, but he lived in the shadow of the Julians, the upstart family of his stepfather. This tension between his heritage and his reality would define his entire life. In this complex environment, Livia's role was paramount. She was no passive bystander. Livia was a master of political maneuvering, a shrewd advisor who understood the precarious nature of power. She knew her son's survival and their future depended on their ability to navigate the treacherous currents of Octavian's court. She instilled in Tiberius the virtues of caution, discipline, and self-control. Public displays of emotion were a weakness. Silence and observation were strengths. While his younger brother Drusus was outgoing and charismatic, Tiberius became the opposite. Quiet, reserved, and intensely watchful. Livia taught him to mask his thoughts, to weigh every word, and to never betray his true feelings. He learned to present a carefully constructed facade to the world, a stoic and dutiful stepson. This was not just a personality trait. It was a survival mechanism, hammered into him by his mother's relentless ambition and the ever-present dangers of his youth. When Tiberius was 9 years old, his biological father died. As was Roman custom, it fell to the eldest son to deliver the eulogy. Standing before the Roman elite, the young boy delivered a public speech from the rostra, the speaker's platform in the forum. This was his first major public appearance, a test orchestrated by Octavian and Livia. He performed his duty flawlessly, his delivery praised for its solemnity and gravity. But beneath the surface, one can only imagine the turmoil. He was eulogizing the father he barely knew, the man his stepfather had defeated and whose wife his stepfather had taken. Every word he spoke was a performance, a careful balancing act between filial duty and political necessity. This event perfectly encapsulates his childhood. He was constantly on stage, his every move scrutinized. He learned that affection could be a political tool and that family ties were subject to the whims of power. The instability of his early years, the flight from Rome, the shocking divorce and remarriage of his mother, and the constant need to prove his loyalty to his stepfather, all of these experiences coalesced to create a deeply complex individual. He was not naturally cheerful or open. He was molded by his circumstances into a person who was careful, suspicious, and eternally guarded. His childhood wasn't filled with simple joys, but with lessons in hard-edged reality. He learned that trust was a rare commodity and that survival depended on self-reliance and an almost paranoid level of caution. The boy who hid in caves and watched his family be torn apart by politics grew into a man who saw potential threats everywhere. This reserved, melancholic, and deeply serious nature wasn't a choice. It was the armor he had forged to protect himself in a world that had shown him, from his very first breath, just how dangerous it could be. This profound sense of caution and his carefully constructed emotional walls would follow him into adulthood, shaping his relationships, his military career, and ultimately, his controversial reign as emperor. Thank you for joining us for this chapter. The story of Tiberius is a powerful reminder of how the crucible of childhood can shape a leader and, in turn, the course of history. If you're finding this journey into the past as fascinating as I am, please hit that like button and be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next chapter, where we explore Tiberius' rise as a military commander and his complicated relationship with the man who would become Emperor Augustus. See you 10. Welcome back to our series on the life of Tiberius. Last time, we explored his tumultuous early years. Today, we're diving into Chapter 3, The Young Commander. This is where the quiet, reserved young man begins to forge a legendary military reputation. So, grab your gear. We're marching into the annals of Roman history. So, how does a young Roman noble, shadowed by political intrigue, become one of Rome's most effective generals? It all started with his first taste of military life. Following the well-trodden path of the Roman elite, Tiberius began his military service as a tribune. This wasn't just some ceremonial role. It was a real, on-the-ground apprenticeship in the art of war. Under the direct command of his stepfather, Emperor Augustus, Tiberius joined the Cantabrian Wars in Spain. This was a brutal, grinding conflict against fierce local tribes who had resisted Roman rule for decades. Imagine being a young officer thrown into this unforgiving environment. It was here, amidst the rugged Spanish mountains, that Tiberius learned the fundamentals of logistics, troop management, and the grim realities of sustained warfare. He wasn't just observing from the rear. He was learning, absorbing every lesson the battlefield had to offer. It was a baptism by fire that would shape the commander he was destined to become. After his initial service, Tiberius's career took a significant leap forward. In 20 BC, he was entrusted with a mission of immense diplomatic and military importance. Augustus sent him east to the powerful Parthian Empire. His task, to retrieve the legionary standards that had been famously lost by Crassus over 30 years earlier at the disastrous Battle of Capri. This was more than just a military objective. It was about restoring Roman honor. The image of those lost eagles haunted the Roman psyche. For a young man in his early 20s, this was an incredible responsibility. Tiberius led an army into Armenia, a kingdom caught between Roman and Parthian influence. He skillfully installed the pro-Roman king, Tigranes IV, on the Armenian throne. This display of military force and diplomatic finesse was enough to intimidate the Parthians. Without a major battle, they agreed to return the standards. For Rome, it was a massive propaganda victory, and for Tiberius, it was a personal triumph that announced his arrival on the world stage. He had succeeded where seasoned generals had failed, not through brute force alone, but through a calculated show of strength and shrewd negotiation. With his reputation growing, Tiberius was soon given a challenge that would truly test his abilities as a commander: the pacification of the Alps. The Alpine tribes, fierce and independent peoples living in the mountainous regions between Italy and Gaul, were a constant thorn in Rome's side. They frequently raided northern Italy, disrupting trade and travel routes that were vital to the empire. Previous attempts to subdue them had been costly and largely ineffective. Augustus decided it was time for a permanent solution, and he entrusted the task to Tiberius and his younger brother Drusus. This wasn't just another border skirmish. It was a large-scale, coordinated pincer movement designed to conquer the entire Alpine region once and for all. The campaign, which took place around 15 BC, was a masterclass in military planning and execution. Drusus advanced from the south, while Tiberius pushed north from Gaul. The terrain was brutal steep valleys, treacherous passes, and unpredictable weather. The tribes, like the Reti and Vindelici, were masters of guerrilla warfare, using their knowledge of the mountains to ambush Roman columns. But Tiberius was no ordinary commander. He was meticulous, patient, and relentless. He understood that controlling the mountains required a different approach than fighting on open plains. His legions built roads, established fortified supply depots, and systematically cleared valleys one by one. He didn't rush. He adapted his tactics, using smaller, more mobile units to hunt down enemy warbands in the high-altitude terrain. What truly set Tiberius apart during these campaigns was his emerging command style. He was known for being an absolute stickler for discipline. While some generals sought popularity with their troops through leniency, Tiberius demanded unwavering obedience and professionalism. He drilled his men relentlessly, ensuring they were always prepared. But this discipline was not born of cruelty. It was born of a deep-seated concern for their welfare and the success of the mission. He was famous for his logistical genius. A saying began to circulate among the legions: "With Tiberius, you might march until your feet bleed, but you'll never go hungry." He personally oversaw the supply lines, ensuring his soldiers were well-fed, well-equipped, and received the best possible medical care. He would often inspect the field hospitals himself, a rare gesture for a high-ranking commander that earned him immense respect. This combination of strict discipline and genuine care for his men created an incredibly effective fighting force. His soldiers trusted him. They knew that his orders, however demanding, were based on sound strategy and a desire to minimize casualties. They saw his personal courage. He didn't just command from a tent. He was often seen near the front lines, sharing the risks with his men. This leadership style resulted in a series of decisive victories. The Alpine tribes, though brave, were systematically defeated. The campaign was a resounding success. The entire region, from the Swiss Alps to the Danube River, was brought under Roman control. New provinces, Rhaetia and Noricum, were established, securing Italy's northern frontier for centuries to come. Tiberius returned to Rome a hero. He had proven himself not just as a capable officer, but as a brilliant strategist and a commander of the highest caliber. He wasn't flamboyant like some of his contemporaries, but his efficiency, his meticulous planning, and his quiet determination were becoming his trademark. The quiet boy from a troubled childhood had transformed into the young commander, one of the Roman Empire's greatest military assets. And that's where we'll leave it for today. Tiberius's early campaigns were just the beginning of a long and storied military career. He had established a reputation for discipline, strategy, and an uncanny ability to win in the toughest of conditions. Next time, we'll see how these skills are put to the ultimate test in the massive, grueling wars in Pannonia and Germania. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey into the past. If you enjoyed this video and want to learn more about the fascinating life of Tiberius, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the notification bell so you don't miss the next chapter. Your support means the world to us. See you next time. Have you ever had to make a choice that tore your heart in two? A decision where your personal happiness was pitted against what you were told was your duty? If so, you might understand the profound personal tragedy of the man who would one day rule Rome, Tiberius. Today, we're diving deep into one of the most heartbreaking chapters of his life. A story of love, loss, and the crushing weight of imperial ambition. In the complex world of Roman politics, genuine affection was a rare commodity, especially in the upper echelons of power. Yet, Tiberius found it. He was married to Vipsania Agrippina, the daughter of his mentor and Augustus's right-hand man, Marcus Agrippa. This wasn't a marriage of political convenience. It was a union of deep, genuine love. By all accounts, Tiberius adored Vipsania. They had a son together, Drusus, and their life was a rare island of domestic bliss in the turbulent sea of Roman society. Vipsania was intelligent, respected, and the center of Tiberius's world. They were, in every sense, a happy family. For Tiberius, a man often described as stern and reserved, this relationship was his anchor, his source of personal joy. He was a successful general, a respected statesman, and a contented husband and father. For a brief, shining moment, it seemed he had it all. But in the shadow of Augustus, personal happiness was a luxury no one, not even his own stepson, could afford. The imperial family was a chessboard, and every member was a piece to be moved at the emperor's will. The game changed dramatically with the death of Marcus Agrippa. In 12 BC, Agrippa had been married to Augusta's only daughter Julia, and was the emperor's designated heir. His death left a power vacuum and an unmarried Julia. Augustus, ever the pragmatist, needed to secure the line of succession. His gaze fell upon Tiberius. Here was a proven military commander, a man of noble birth, and, most importantly, someone he could control. There was just one problem. Tiberius was already happily married. For Augustus, this was a minor inconvenience. For Tiberius, it was a catastrophe. The emperor issued a command that was as cold as it was absolute. Tiberius was to divorce the woman he loved, Vipsania, and marry the now-widowed Julia. This wasn't a suggestion. It was an order from the most powerful man in the world. Imagine the torment. He was being asked to shatter his own happiness, to break the heart of the woman he cherished, all for the sake of political strategy. Julia was known for her vivacious and, by some accounts, promiscuous lifestyle, the complete opposite of the modest and devoted Vipsania. Forcing them together was not just a political maneuver. It was a deeply personal and cruel act. The conflict raging within Tiberius must have been immense. On one side was his love for Vipsania, his duty as a husband and father, and his own personal happiness. On the other was his duty to the state, his loyalty to his stepfather, the emperor. and the undeniable reality of Roman power dynamics. To refuse Augustus was unthinkable. It would mean the end of his career, exile, and possibly even death. It was a choice between personal fulfillment and political survival. He was trapped. The needs of the empire, as defined by Augustus, outweighed the needs of the individual. His personal life was being sacrificed on the altar of the state. With a heavy heart, Tiberius obeyed. He divorced Vipsania. The historical accounts of their separation are utterly devastating. It is said that Tiberius was so grief-stricken that Augustus had to ensure the two never crossed paths again. On one occasion, they happened to see each other by chance in the street. Tiberius reportedly followed Vipsania with his eyes, his face streaming with tears, unable to look away until she was out of sight. The incident was so painful for him that measures were taken to prevent it from ever happening again. He loved her that much. Vipsania, for her part, remarried and lived a quiet life. But the wound in Tiberius's heart never healed. He had performed his duty, but the cost was a part of his soul. His subsequent marriage to Julia was a disaster from the start. They were fundamentally incompatible, and their union was cold and loveless. Their only child died in infancy, severing the last fragile link between them. While Tiberius was away on campaign, Julia's scandalous behavior became the talk of Rome, culminating in a public disgrace where Augustus himself had to exile his own daughter for adultery. Tiberius, who had been forced to marry her, was now publicly shamed by her actions. He had sacrificed his happiness for nothing. The marriage that was meant to secure his position ended up becoming a source of constant humiliation. This entire saga profoundly changed him. The warmth and contentment he had with Vipsania were replaced by a growing bitterness, cynicism, and a deeper retreat into his naturally reserved shell. This chapter of Tiberius' life is a powerful lesson in the clash between personal desire and public duty. How does a person recover when their greatest happiness is taken from them for political gain? Many historians believe this forced divorce was the turning point for Tiberius, the moment that began to curdle his character and set him on the path to becoming the gloomy and suspicious emperor. He is often remembered as he did his duty to Rome, but Rome, in the form of Augustus, showed him no mercy in return. He secured his place in the line of succession, but lost the one thing that truly mattered to him. It is a stark reminder that behind the marble statues and grand titles were real people with real hearts, capable of being broken by the very power they were meant to serve. The story of Tiberius and Vipsania is not just a historical footnote. It's a timeless human tragedy. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey into the heart of ancient Rome. If you found this story as moving as I do, please hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the lives of the fascinating figures who shaped our world. Don't forget to ring the notification bell so you won't miss our next chapter. See you next time. Welcome back to our series. Last time, we left Tiberius having secured his position and proven his capabilities. Now we journey north to the dense, foreboding forests of Germania. For Chapter 5. The campaigns in Germany. This is where Tiberius would truly cement his reputation as one of Rome's greatest military commanders. Following the disastrous defeat of Varus at the Teutoburg forest, the Roman psyche was shattered. 3 entire legions wiped out. The Rhine frontier was in chaos, and the fear of a Germanic invasion of Gaul was very real. Augustus, in his desperation, turned to the one man he knew could salvage the situation: Tiberius. In 04 AD, Tiberius arrived on the Rhine, not with a roar of vengeance, but with the quiet, steely resolve that defined his character. He wasn't there for a quick, puny TV raid. He was there to restore Roman honor, re-establish dominance, and systematically dismantle the Germanic threat. His first task was monumental: rebuilding the army. The morale of the Rhine legions was at rock bottom. They were terrified of the enemy and had lost faith in their leadership. This is where Tiberius's genius for discipline truly shone. He didn't just give orders, he led by example. He lived like his soldiers, sharing their simple rations, sleeping on the ground, and marching alongside them. He reinstated the harsh, traditional Roman discipline that had grown lax. Centurions who showed cowardice were demoted or dismissed. Laziness was not tolerated. Every soldier knew exactly what was expected of him, because they saw their commander-in-chief holding himself to the same, if not higher, standards. He was known to inspect sentry posts personally in the dead of night, ensuring every man was at his post and alert. This wasn't just about punishment. It was about rebuilding a culture of professionalism and mutual trust. The soldiers began to respect him, not out of fear, but out of a shared sense of purpose and a deep admiration for his unwavering competence. With his army retrained and remolded into a disciplined fighting force, Tiberius began his campaigns in earnest. But he didn't just charge headlong into the forest. He was a master of logistics and strategy. He understood that Germania wasn't conquered by battles alone, but by controlling the land and its resources. In the summer of 04 AD, he led his army across the Rhine. This was a massive undertaking, involving 4 legions. He advanced methodically, securing his supply lines at every step. He didn't chase phantom armies into ambushes. Instead, he moved deliberately, building fortified camps, bridges, and supply depots as he went. His strategy was a combination of overwhelming force and surgical precision. He divided his forces, using both land and river routes to penetrate deep into enemy territory. He utilized the Roman fleet to sail up the Elbe River, deeper into Germania than any Roman had gone before. This allowed him to supply his troops and outflank the Germanic tribes, preventing them from melting away into the forests, as they usually did. He was forcing them to confront Roman power on his terms. One by one, the tribes that had joined the rebellion were subdued. The Canaanophates, the Chatti, the Bructeriol, were forced to submit to Roman authority. Tiberius didn't always seek annihilation. He was a pragmatist. When a tribe surrendered, he would accept their submission, take hostages to ensure their loyalty, and integrate them back into the Roman sphere of influence. His goal was long-term stability, not just short-term revenge. This was a crucial difference between his approach and the recklessness that led to Varus's defeat. By 05 AD, Tiberius's campaign reached its zenith. He had marched his legions all the way to the Elbe River, effectively cutting Germania in two. From the west, his land army had pacified everything up to the river. From the north, his fleet controlled the coastline and the river mouth. It was a strategic masterpiece. He had effectively re-established Roman control over the vast territory between the Rhine and the Elbe. Tacitus, the great Roman historian, notes that the Germanic tribes were stunned. They were caught in a pincer movement, unable to unite and unable to escape. During this campaign, a famous encounter occurred. As the Roman fleet sailed up the Elbe, they were met by a local chieftain who had heard tales of the mighty Roman Empire but had never seen it. He paddled out in a small canoe and asked for permission to come aboard and see Tiberius, the commander whose name was now legendary throughout the forests. Permission was granted. The old chieftain looked at Tiberius, his men, and his ships in awe, and declared that he had seen the gods and that it was the luckiest day of his life. This story, whether entirely factual or embellished, illustrates the sheer psychological impact of Tiberius's campaign. He wasn't just conquering land, he was projecting an image of invincible Roman power. The plan was to make this new territory a permanent province. In 06 AD, Tiberius gathered an immense army of 12 legions, the largest Roman force ever assembled for a single operation, to launch a final campaign against Maroboduus. The king of the Marcomanni. Maroboduus had built a powerful kingdom in Moderande Bohemia, and he was the last major independent power in the region. Tiberius planned a massive, multi-pronged attack to encircle and crush him once and for all. This would have been the final act in the conquest of Germania. But fate, as it so often does in Roman history, intervened. Just as Tiberius was about to launch his attack, a massive revolt erupted in his rear, in the provinces of Pannonia and Illyricum. We'll cover this great Illyrian revolt in our next chapter. This new crisis was so severe that Tiberius had to abandon his German campaign at the cusp of total victory. He quickly made a peace treaty with Maroboduus, a testament to his diplomatic skill even under pressure, and marched his legions south to deal with the new, more immediate threat. Although the full annexation of Germania was thwarted, Tiberius's achievements were nothing short of incredible. He took a shattered, demoralized army and rebuilt it into a formidable force. He restored Roman dominance over the Rhine frontier, making it secure for decades to come. He penetrated deeper into Germania than any Roman before him and systematically pacified the tribes, avenging the defeat of Varus and restoring Roman honor. His campaigns were a masterclass in strategy, logistics, and discipline. He proved that conquering Germania was possible, even if circumstances ultimately prevented him from finishing the job. His work laid the foundation for the future Roman policy in the region, a policy of containment and defense along the Rhine that would last for centuries. These years in Germany defined Tiberius. They showcased his military brilliance, his stoic leadership, and his unwavering dedication to the Roman state. He wasn't a flashy, charismatic general like his brother Drusus or his adopted son Germanicus. He was quiet, methodical, and relentlessly effective. And as we'll see, it was this reputation for competence that made him the only choice to save the empire once again when the Great Illyrian Revolt threatened to tear it apart. Thank you so much for joining me for this chapter. The story is only getting more intense from here. If you enjoyed this video and want to learn what happens next, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the notification bell so you don't miss our next episode on the Great Illyrian Revolt. We truly appreciate your support. See you next time. Hello, and welcome back to our series. Today, we're diving into Chapter 6, Campaigns in the East, a pivotal period that cemented one general's reputation while revealing the man behind the armor. So, grab your seat, and let's journey back to the frontiers of the Roman Empire. The year is 54 BC. The political climate in Rome is a tangled mess of ambition and rivalry, but far from the Senate's clamor. Our general is tasked with a mission of immense importance. Securing the volatile eastern borders, the kingdoms of Armenia and Parthia, long thorns in Rome's side, are stirring. This isn't just another military campaign. It's a he-stakes diplomatic chess match, where one wrong move could plunge the entire region into chaos. Our general arrives not with a massive invasion force, but with a clear strategy. He understands that the East is won not just with swords, but with words and shrewd negotiation. His first stop is Armenia. King Artavasdes II is a cunning ruler, playing Rome and Parthia against each other. Instead of marching on the capital, our general initiates dialogue. He presents himself not as a conqueror, but as a partner. He offers Roman protection and trade benefits in exchange for loyalty and a buffer against Parthian aggression. It's a masterclass in diplomacy. He leverages Rome's power without unsheathing a single gladiator, securing an alliance that stabilizes the entire northern frontier. This diplomatic triumph is a testament to his unique approach. While other Roman commanders saw only battlefields, he saw a complex web of interests. He listened to the local leaders, understood their fears, and offered solutions that served both their needs and Rome's. His reputation as a reliable, intelligent leader begins to spread like wildfire across the East. He's not just another brute in a red cloak. He's a statesman. But diplomacy can only go so far. The Parthian Empire, Rome's great rival, sees this new alliance as a direct threat. They are a formidable force, famed for their horse archers and heavy cataphract cavalry. A confrontation is inevitable. The Parthians launch a probing attack, testing the strength of the new Roman-Armenia pact. This is the moment of truth. Our general's response is a study in military brilliance. He anticipates the Parthian tactics. He knows their strength lies in open-field battles, where their cavalry can dominate. So, he refuses to give them that advantage. He uses the rugged terrain of Armenia to his benefit, forcing the Parthians into narrow passias and broken ground where their horsemen are less effective. He employs a flexible defense, using his legions to hold key positions while deploying light-armed auxiliaries to harass the enemy's flanks and supply lines. The decisive battle comes near the town of Artaxata. The Parthians, overconfident, charge into what they believe is a weak Roman center. It's a trap, as the Parthian cavalry commits. The Roman legions hold firm, their shields locked in the famous testudo formation, deflecting the storm of arrows. At the crucial moment, hidden forces emerge from the hills on either side, crashing into the Parthian flanks. The meticulously planned ambush turns the tide. The Parthian army, caught in a pincer movement, breaks and flees. The victory is absolute, and its impact is immediate. Parthia is humbled, their ambitions in Armenia checked for a generation. News of the victory echoes all the way back to Rome. In the Forum, senators who once scoffed at his methods now praise his name. He is hailed as Rome's finest general, a commander who can win both the war and the peace. His name becomes synonymous with reliability and success. When there's a crisis on the frontier, there is only one man they trust to handle it. But this is where our story takes a more personal, more intimate turn. The public image of the brilliant, unshakable commander is only one side of the coin. As we peel back the layers of his public persona, we discover a starkly different man in private. The same general who could command thousands with a single gesture, who could outwit entire empires, was in his quiet moments a man wrestling with a deep, private melancholy. Letters to his close friends in Rome paint a poignant picture. He writes, not of glory or conquest, but of the immense weight of command. He speaks of the sleepless nights spent poring over maps, the faces of the young soldiers he sends into battle haunting his thoughts. While the city of Rome celebrated his victories with lavish triumphs, he found little joy in them. He saw the cost of war in a way that few others did. The lost lives, the shattered families, the burned villages. This contrast is the core of his fascinating character. On the battlefield, he was decisive, innovative, and seemingly invincible. In his tent at night, under the flicker of an oil lamp, he was a philosopher, a poet, a man burdened by the very success that defined him. He was a Roman, through and through, driven by duty and honor. Yet, he was also deeply introspective, constantly questioning the nature of power and the price of empire. This internal conflict makes his achievements all the more remarkable. He didn't fight for personal glory. He fought because it was his duty. His military genius was not fueled by ambition, but by a profound desire to protect Rome and its people, to bring order to a chaotic world. It was this sense of responsibility that pushed him forward, even as the personal toll mounted. His campaigns in the East, therefore, were more than just a series of military and diplomatic victories. They were the crucible that forged his legend, solidifying his public reputation as Rome's most dependable general, while simultaneously deepening the private melancholy that would follow him for the rest of his life. He was a man who won an empire on the outside, while fighting a silent, lonely battle within. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey into the past. It's a powerful reminder that even the greatest figures in history are complex, multifaceted human beings. If you found this chapter interesting, please hit that like button and consider subscribing and turning on notifications so you don't miss the next part of our story. We'd love to have you with us. Until next time, stay curious. Hey everyone, welcome back to a deep dive into the life of Tiberius. So, picture this. It's 06 BC. Tiberius is at the absolute peak of his career. He's been granted tribunician power for 5 years, a massive honor that essentially marks him as Augustus's co-ruler and chosen successor. He's celebrated for his military victories, respected in the Senate, and seemingly has the entire Roman world at his feet. And then, he does something no one saw coming. He quits. He just leaves. Tiberius announced his retirement from public life and his withdrawal to the Greek island of Rhodes. To say this shocked Rome would be an understatement. It was a bombshell. The official reason he gave was that he was weary of his duties and needed a rest. But nobody really bought that. This was Tiberius, the workhorse general, the dutiful statesman. Weariness. It seemed too simple. So, what was really going on? Historians have debated this for centuries, and it's likely a mix of several powerful motivations. First, let's talk about the political climate. While Augustus had clearly favored Tiberius, the emperor was also grooming his own biological grandsons, Gaius and Lucius Caesar, the sons of his daughter Julia and his late friend Agrippa. These boys were still young, but Augustus doted on them, fast-tracking their careers and making it clear they were the future of the dynasty. Tiberius, the seasoned and experienced stepson, might have felt like he was just a placeholder, a regent, keeping the seat warm until the true heirs came of age. This must have been deeply frustrating. Imagine being the most qualified person for the job, only to see it promised to two teenagers because of their bloodline. He might have decided to remove himself from this awkward and potentially dangerous dynamic, essentially saying, "If you don't truly want me, I won't stay where I'm not wanted." Then there was his personal life, which was a complete mess. His marriage to Augustus's daughter, Julia, was a disaster. He had been forced to divorce his beloved Vipsania Agrippina to marry her, a political match that brought him nothing but misery. Julia was known for her scandalous and promiscuous behavior, which was a profound embarrassment to the traditional and austere Tiberius. Living under the same roof with a woman he reportedly despised, while constantly reminded of the wife he had lost, must have been unbearable. Rhodes offered an escape from this personal hell. It was a way to put thousands of miles between himself and the source of his daily unhappiness. So, Tiberius packs his bags and sails for Rhodes, a beautiful island known for its schools of philosophy and rhetoric. He wasn't going there to live a life of lazy luxury, though. He lived modestly in a relatively small house, walking around the town without the usual retinue of a Roman aristocrat. He spent his days attending lectures, engaging in scholarly debates with philosophers, and studying astrology, a subject that fascinated him for the rest of his life. He was effectively trading the corridors of power in Rome for the lecture halls of a Greek island. He behaved like a private citizen, getting into friendly arguments with local professors and enjoying the simple, intellectual life he couldn't have in Rome. It was a complete rejection of the power and prestige he had worked so hard to achieve. Back in Rome, Augustus was furious. He saw Tiberius's departure as a personal betrayal and a dereliction of duty. He pleaded with him to return, even having Tiberius's own mother, Livia, tried to persuade him. But Tiberius was resolute. Estayet put. This decision had massive consequences. With Tiberius gone, the young Gaius and Lucius Caesar were pushed even further into the spotlight. Rome was effectively left without its most experienced general and administrator. For years, Tiberius remained in this self-imposed exile. It was a strange period of limbo. He still held tribunician power, but he wasn't using it. He was a prince of Rome, living like a private scholar. He watched from afar as the grandsons of Augustus took on more and more responsibility. But as we'll see, fate had a cruel twist in store for the imperial family. The deaths of both Lucius and Gaius within a few years would dramatically change everything, forcing Augustus to turn once again to the one man he had sidelined. Tiberius's quiet retirement was about to come to an abrupt end, and his return to Rome would set the stage for his eventual and reluctant ascension to the throne. Thanks for watching, everyone. It's a fascinating chapter in his life, showing a side of him that's very different from the grim emperor he would later become. If you enjoyed this, please hit that like button, subscribe for more, and let me know your thoughts on Tiberius's Rhodes sabbatical in the comments below. See you in the next video. Hello history buffs, and welcome back to our deep dive into the life of Tiberius. Today, we're in Chapter 8, The Recall to Rome. This isn't just a change of scenery for Tiberius. It's a turning point that will forever alter the course of the Roman Empire. So, grab your seat, because the political drama is about to reach a fever pitch. Imagine being Augustus, the master of Rome, the architect of an empire. You've planned everything, down to the last detail, especially the most crucial part. Who comes next? You've groomed your grandsons, Gaius and Lucius Caesar, the sons of your beloved daughter Julia and your trusted right-hand man, Marcus Agrippa. They are the golden boys, the future of Rome, paraded before the public, their faces stamped on coins. They represent the continuation of your Julian bloodline, your legacy. But fate, as it so often does in Roman history, had other, crueler plans. The succession plan, so carefully constructed, began to crumble, not with a bang, but with a series of devastating personal tragedies for Augustus. The first blow had come years earlier, in 23 BC, with the death of his nephew and first choice, Marcellus, young, popular, and married to Augustus's daughter Julia. His death was a national tragedy and a personal heartbreak for the emperor. Now, history was repeating itself in the most painful way. In 02 AD, Lucius Caesar, the younger of the two grandsons, fell ill and died in Massilia. While on his way to a command in Spain, he was just a teenager. The foundation of Augustus's succession plan was cracked. But it wasn't broken yet. There was still Gaius. Gaius Caesar was the elder, the primary heir. He had been sent east on a grand mission, a tour meant to showcase him to the legions and the provinces, to season him for the power he was destined to wield. He was negotiating with the Parthians, Rome's great rival, a task designed to cement his reputation as a capable leader. But in Quadrad, during a minor siege in Armenia, Gaius was wounded. The wound festered, and his health, both physical and perhaps mental, deteriorated rapidly. On his way back to Rome, a broken young man, he died in Lycia. He was only 23. For Augustus, this was an unimaginable catastrophe. Within 2 years, both his grandsons, his chosen successors, the sons he had adopted and raised as his own, were gone. The Julian line was in peril. The carefully planned, stable future of the Roman Empire was suddenly hanging by a thread. The gossip in Rome must have been relentless. Was the imperial family cursed? Who was left? The eyes of Rome, and more importantly, the desperate eyes of the aging Emperor Augustus, turned to one man, a man who was not in Rome, but in self-imposed exile on the Greek island of Rhodes, a man who had been cast aside, whose marriage to Augustus's daughter had been a political disaster, and whose very presence had become an inconvenience. That man, of course, was Tiberius. For 7 long years, Tiberius had lived as a private citizen on Rhodes. He had left Rome at the height of his military career, feeling sidelined and disrespected as Gaius and Lucius were promoted over him. He studied philosophy and astrology, walked the quiet streets, and tried to stay out of the political fray. His exile was a statement of his frustration. He wanted no part in a system that so clearly favored others. But now, everything had changed. The deaths of Gaius and Lucius created a power vacuum that only he could fill. He was the most experienced general Rome had. He was a Claudian, from one of Rome's oldest and most respected families, and crucially, he was Augustus's stepson. The personal feelings between the two men were complicated, to say the least. Augustus had never shown Tiberius the same affection he showered on his grandsons. Livia, Tiberius's mother and Augustus's wife, had been lobbying for her son's return for years, but now it wasn't just a mother's wish, it was a state necessity. The message arrived in Rhodes, a recall to Rome. It wasn't a request, it was a summons. Tiberius, now in his mid-40s, Tab had choice to make. Could he return to the city that had, in his eyes, rejected him? Could he step back into the shadow of a man, Augustus, with whom he had such a strained relationship? Did he even want the power that was now being offered to him? His return to Rome in 04 AD was not a triumphant parade. It was a sober, serious affair. The city he returned to was one in mourning, and the position he was about to step into was one defined by loss. Augustus, left with no other viable option, formally adopted Tiberius as his son, alongside a much younger grandson, Agrippa, but it was clear to everyone who the real heir was. Immediately upon his adoption, Augustus made his intentions clear. Tiberius was granted tribunician power for 10 years. This was the key. Tribunician power was the cornerstone of the emperor's authority, giving him the right to veto magistrates and propose legislation. Granting it to Tiberius was a clear signal. This is my partner in power, my successor. For Tiberius, this must have been a bitter pill to swallow. He was now the heir not by choice or affection, but by default. He was the last man standing. He had spent his life serving Rome on the battlefield, winning victories in Germany and Pannonia, only to be pushed aside. Now, he was being pulled back in, not because he was wanted, but because he was needed. His reluctance was palpable. The ancient historian Suetonius tells us he was slow to accept. Fully aware of the burdens and dangers that came with the position, he knew he would be compared to the beloved Gaius and Lucius. He knew his stern, reserved personality was a stark contrast to the Julian charisma. Augustus, ever a pragmatist, immediately put his new heir to work. There was no time for a gentle transition. A massive rebellion had broken out in Pannonia and Dalmatia, in the modern-day Balkans. It was one of the most dangerous revolts the empire had ever faced, requiring a massive military response. And who was the only man capable of leading it? Tiberius. So, almost as soon as he returned, Tiberius was gone again, sent to the frontier to do what he did best, command legions, and win wars. For the next several years, he was embroiled in a grueling, difficult campaign to crush the great Illyrian revolt. This wasn't a glorious war of conquest. It was a brutal slog to hold the empire together. While Augustus managed affairs in Rome, Tiberius was on the front lines, reinforcing his reputation as a brilliant, if uncharismatic, general. His victories in Pannonia solidified his position. He had proven, yet again, his indispensable value to the state. He was no longer just the reluctant heir. He was the proven protector of the empire. With every victory, his status as the successor grew more secure. The memory of the Golden Boys, Gaius and Lucius, began to fade, replaced by the reality of Tiberius, the seasoned commander who was actively saving Rome. But Tiberius never seemed to truly embrace his destiny. He performed his duties with meticulous efficiency, but without joy. He was a man defined by duty, not ambition. He was stepping into shoes he never wanted to fill, following an act he could never hope to match, all while navigating the complex and often toxic politics of the imperial court. The recall to Rome wasn't a triumph. It was the beginning of a long, heavy burden that he would carry for the rest of his life. His path to the throne was paved not with glory, but with the tombstones of Augustus's heirs. And that's where we'll leave it for today. The stage is set. Tiberius is back. He is the designated heir, and he has proven his worth once more on the battlefield. But the old Emperor Augustus still lives, and the final transfer of power is yet to come. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey. If you enjoyed this exploration of Roman politics and power, please hit that like button, and be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next chapter. We love hearing from you, so leave your thoughts and questions in the comments below. Until next time, stay curious. Hello everyone, and welcome back to our journey through the annals of Roman history. Today, we arrive at a pivotal moment, the end of an era, the death of the first Roman emperor, Augustus. This wasn't just the passing of a man. It was the ultimate test of the system he had spent over 4 decades building. The question on everyone's mind was, would the Principate survive its creator? As Augustus entered the final years of his long reign, the shadow of mortality loomed large. He had outlived so many of his chosen heirs, his nephew Marcellus, his grandsons Gaius and Lucius Caesar. The succession, once a crowded field of promising young men, had become a pressing and delicate issue. The fate of the entire Roman world rested on ensuring a smooth, peaceful transfer of power. One man remained, a seasoned if reluctant figure: Tiberius, Augustus's stepson. Tiberius was a complex character, a brilliant and proven military commander. He had secured Rome's northern frontiers and was respected, if not loved, by the legions. Yet, his relationship with Augustus was often strained. He had even self-exiled to Rhodes for a time, seemingly withdrawing from public life. But with the deaths of Gaius and Lucius, Augustus had little choice. He officially adopted Tiberius in 04 CE, making him his legal son and heir. This wasn't a simple signature on a document. Augustus began a meticulous, decade-long process of grooming Tiberius. For the throne, he shared his powers, granting Tiberius proconsular imperium, the authority to command armies, and tribunation, potestos, the civil authority of a tribune. They ruled side by side, a co-regency, in all but name. Augustus was showcasing Tiberius to the Senate, the army, and the people, making it clear that this was his chosen successor. It was a masterclass in political maneuvering, designed to make Tiberius's eventual accession feel not like a radical new beginning, but a natural continuation. He was weaving Tiberius so deeply into the fabric of his own rule that to reject Tiberius would be to reject the legacy of the divine Augustus himself. But we can't talk about the succession without mentioning the formidable woman who stood at the center of the imperial family, Livia, Augustus's wife. For over 50 years, she was his most trusted advisor and confidant. While Augustus managed the public face of the empire, Livia managed the imperial household, a political entity in its own right. She was a master of the subtle, behind-the-scenes influence that characterized Roman aristocratic politics. As Augustus's health declined, Livia's role became even more crucial. She was, after all, Tiberius's mother. Her ambition for her son was well known. Ancient sources, always hungry for drama, paint her as a schemer, orchestrating events to ensure Tiberius's path to power was clear. While these accounts might be sensationalized, it's undeniable that Livia was a key player. She would have used her extensive network of contacts and her immense personal authority to smooth the way for her son, quelling potential rivalries and ensuring the loyalty of key figures within the palace and the Senate. She was the steady hand on the tiller, guiding the family through the uncertain waters of succession. She understood, perhaps better than anyone, that the stability of the dynasty was paramount. In the summer of 14 CE, the inevitable finally happened. The 75-year-old Augustus, feeling his health failing, traveled from Rome. On his way back, his condition worsened. He was taken to his father's old family home in Nola, the very place where his own father had died. It was here, on the 19th of August, that the man who had remade the Roman world breathed his last. According to the historian Sejanus, his final moments were strangely theatrical. He called his friends to his bedside and asked if he had played his part well in the comedy of life. When they assured him he had, he added a line from a Greek play. "Since, well, I've played my part. All clap your hands, and from the stage dismiss me with applause." Then, in his final private moments with Livia, he is said to have whispered, "Livia, live on, mindful of our marriage, and farewell." The news of his death was carefully managed. Livia and Tiberius, who had been rushed to his side, secured the house and controlled the flow of information. This was the critical moment. Any hint of a power vacuum could invite chaos or a challenge to Tiberius's claim. Messengers were dispatched to the legions on the frontiers, not just with news of Augustus's death, but with their orders from the new commander-in-chief, Tiberius. The Praetorian Guard in Rome was put on alert, and their loyalty secured. Everything Augustus had planned for, and everything Livia had worked for, was now put into motion. The transfer of power, when it was finally made public, was a masterstroke of political theater. Tiberius did not simply declare himself emperor. That would have been too much like a king, too much like the old tyrants Rome had fought to overthrow. Instead, he played the part of the reluctant servant of the state. When the Senate convened, they officially bestowed upon Augustus his titles and powers. Tiberius, in a show of humility, initially hesitated, suggesting that the burden of ruling such a vast empire was too great for one man. This was, of course, a carefully calculated performance. The senators, understanding the script, practically begged him to accept. They knew that the alternative was civil war. By feigning reluctance, Tiberius was allowing the Senate to grant him the power, preserving the illusion of the republic that Augustus had so carefully constructed. He wasn't seizing power. He was accepting a responsibility thrust upon him by the state. The system had worked. The Principate had survived its founder. The age of Augustus was over, and the age of Tiberius had begun. The precedent was set, establishing a dynastic model that would define the Roman Empire for centuries to come. The death of one man did not mean the death of the empire he had built. Thank you so much for joining me for this crucial chapter in Roman history. It's a fascinating story of power, family, and the careful construction of a political legacy. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing to the channel for more deep dives into the ancient world. Don't forget to hit that notification bell so you won't miss our next episode. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Welcome back to our journey through the annals of Roman history. Last time, we bid farewell to the colossal figure of Augustus, the man who transformed a republic into an empire. His reign was so long, so impactful, that it begged the question, what comes next? Who could possibly fill those shoes? Today, we meet the man tasked with that impossible job, Tiberius, the second emperor of Rome. The transition from Augustus to Tiberius wasn't the grand, celebratory affair you might imagine. In fact, it was shrouded in a cloud of uncertainty and, on Tiberius's part, a deep, almost theatrical reluctance. When Augustus died in 14 AD, all eyes turned to his 55-year-old stepson. Tiberius was a seasoned military commander, a man of proven ability. Yet he wasn't the charismatic, universally loved figure Augustus had been. He was known for being grim, private, and difficult to read. Upon Augustus's death, the machinery of the state began to grind into motion. The Senate, the army, and the people of Rome looked to Tiberius for leadership. But instead of seizing power with gusto, Tiberius hesitated. He played a curious political game in the Senate. When they offered him the full extent of Augustus's powers, the authority that made one an emperor, he suggested that the burden was too great for one man, and that perhaps the power should be shared among several senators. Was this genuine humility, a sincere belief that he wasn't up to the task? Or was it a clever political maneuver? Historians have debated this for centuries. Some believe Tiberius was genuinely cautious, wary of the immense responsibility and the potential dangers that came with it. He had seen the bloody end of the Republic and knew how precarious power could be. Others argue it was a test. He was forcing the Senate to practically beg him to take power, thereby legitimizing his rule not as an act of ambition, but as a reluctant acceptance of duty. By making them insist, he was ensuring they couldn't later claim he had usurped authority. It was a subtle but brilliant move to establish his legitimacy without appearing like a tyrant. Regardless of his motives, the Senate did insist. They knew that a power vacuum was far more dangerous than a single ruler they understood. The memory of civil war was still fresh, and so, reluctantly or not, Tiberius Claudius Nero became the second emperor of Rome. But accepting the title was just the first step. Now, he had to govern, and that meant performing a precarious, balancing act that would define his entire reign. First, there was the Senate. Augustus had masterfully managed this ancient institution, giving them the illusion of power while holding the real authority himself. Tiberius, being less personable and more direct, had a much rockier relationship with the senators. He treated them with formal respect, often referring to them as the masters of the state. But he also grew impatient with their flattery and political games. This created a sense of mutual suspicion. The senators, many of whom came from ancient, proud families, resented taking orders from a man they considered their equal, while Tiberius grew to despise what he saw as their hypocrisy and incompetence. Then there was the army. The legions were the true foundation of imperial power. Their loyalty was not to an abstract idea of Rome, but to their commander, the man who led them, paid them, and promised them land upon retirement. Immediately after Augustus's death, mutinies broke out among the legions stationed on the Rhine and in Pannonia. The soldiers had been pushed to their limits with long service and harsh conditions, and they saw the change in leadership as an opportunity to demand better terms. This was Tiberius's first major crisis. He couldn't afford to look weak. He dispatched his son, Drusus, and his popular nephew, Germanicus, to quell the rebellions. Germanicus, in particular, was a rock star of his day and charismatic and a brilliant general, beloved by the soldiers. He managed to calm the mutinous legions on the German frontier, not just with promises, but by channeling their energy into successful campaigns against German tribes. This success, however, planted a seed of a different problem for Tiberius. Germanicus's immense popularity began to eclipse that of the emperor himself, creating a potential Ravella dynamic that would lead to tragedy down the line. Finally, Tiberius had to manage the expectations of the Roman populace. The people of the city were used to the grand spectacles, the grain distributions, and the personal charisma of Augustus. Tiberius was not a showman. He disliked gladiatorial games and lavish public displays, viewing them as wasteful. He was a frugal and efficient administrator, and under his early rule, the empire's finances were incredibly stable. He focused on good governance, secure borders, and a fair justice system. But good governance is often invisible. The public missed the bread and circuses of Augustus's era. They saw Tiberius as stingy, remote, and aloof. He didn't connect with them on a personal level, and this lack of public affection would curdle into distrust and dislike over the years. So, in these early years, we see Tiberius trying to navigate this complex political landscape. He's balancing the proud and resentful Senate, the powerful and demanding army, and a fickle public that craved a charismatic leader he simply wasn't. He was a capable administrator, perhaps even a brilliant one, but he lacked the political touch, the easy charm of his predecessor. He was a soldier and a traditionalist, trying to rule an empire that demanded a new kind of politics. His initial hesitation to take power, once seen as a sign of republican virtue, soon began to look like independence. His attempts to treat the Senate as partners often devolved into frustrating gridlock. His reliance on his family, like Germanicus, to handle crises solved immediate problems, but created long-term threats. Tiberius was a man caught between the ghost of Augustus and the harsh realities of power. His reign started not with a bang, but with a cautious, uncertain step into a role he never seemed to truly want. And as we'll see next time, this initial caution and suspicion would eventually curdle into a dark and terrifying paranoia, transforming the reluctant ruler into a figure of fear and plunging Rome into an era of treason, trials, and terror. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the complex character of Tiberius, please hit that like button, and be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next chapter. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Was Tiberius's reluctance real or a political act? Until next time, stay curious. Hello and welcome back to our series on the Roman Empire. We re-diving deep into a figure often overshadowed by his legendary predecessor and his infamous successor, Tiberius. When you think of Tiberius, what comes to mind? For many, it's the image of a gloomy, paranoid emperor hiding away on the island of Capri. But that's only a sliver of the story. For the first decade of his reign, Tiberius was one of the most effective, conscientious, and, dare I say, brilliant administrators Rome had ever seen. So, let us pull back the curtain of gossip and slander and look at the real Tiberius. The man who actually ran the Roman Empire. After the glittering, charismatic era of Augustus, Tiberius was a dramatic change of pace. Augustus was the ultimate showman, a master of public relations who charmed the Senate and the people. Tiberius, on the other hand, was the polar opposite. He was reserved, stern, and often awkward in public. He detested flattery and had little patience for the political games of Rome. Where Augustus ruled with a smile and a grand vision, Tiberius ruled with a ledger and a deep sense of duty. This contrast couldn't have been starker, and it's key to understanding why his contemporaries, and later historians, found him so difficult to like, even if they couldn't deny his competence. One of the defining features of Tiberius's governance was his legendary frugality. Augustus had spent lavishly on public works, games, and handouts to secure his popularity. Tiberius, however, saw the state treasury not as a tool for public relations, but as a resource to be carefully guarded for the good of the empire. He slashed extravagant spending, cut back on expensive gladiatorial games, and lived a remarkably modest lifestyle for an emperor. This didn't win him many friends among the Roman populace, who were used to grand spectacles, or the elite, who saw his thriftiness as unbecoming of an emperor. But this caution had a purpose. When a massive earthquake devastated 12 cities in the province of Asia in 17 AD, where did the money for relief come from? It came from the treasury that Tiberius had so carefully managed. He was able to remit taxes for the affected cities for 5 years, and personally donated huge sums to aid in their reconstruction. This wasn't a one-off event. He repeatedly used the state's wealth to provide relief after disasters, bail out banks during a financial crisis, and ensure the stability of the grain supply. His famous motto was that a good shepherd shears his flock. He doesn't flay it alive. He saw his role as protecting the provinces from greedy governors and the state from financial ruin. His frugality wasn't miserliness. It was fiscal responsibility on an imperial scale. But Tiberius wasn't just about saving money. He was about building a more efficient state. He inherited a system that was still very much a patchwork, reliant on the personal relationships and ad hoc arrangements of Augustus. Tiberius, the methodical administrator, began the slow, unglamorous work of turning this system into a true professional bureaucracy. He understood that the empire was too vast to be run on charisma alone. It needed processes, skilled professionals, and clear lines of authority. He expanded the civil service, promoting talented men based on merit, not just their family name. These were the equestrians, the middle class of Rome, who became the backbone of imperial administration, managing finances, logistics, and provincial governance. This was a quiet revolution. By empowering these professionals, Tiberius was reducing the power of the old senatorial aristocracy and creating a more stable, predictable, and fair system of government for the millions living under Roman rule. It wasn't flashy, but it was fundamental to the long-term survival and success of the Roman Empire. A crucial part of this administrative focus was on provincial governance. Under the Republic, provincial governors often saw their term as a chance to enrich themselves at the expense of the locals. Augustus began to curb this, but Tiberius took it to a new level. He was known for his policy of keeping competent governors in their posts for long periods, sometimes for a decade or more. His reasoning was sound. A governor who knew they would be in place for a long time was more likely to invest in the long-term health of their province rather than trying to extract as much wealth as possible in a short time. He was also notoriously strict with governors who abused their power. He actively listened to complaints from provincial delegations and would bring corrupt officials to trial. This earned him immense loyalty and respect in the provinces, even as his reputation in the city of Rome soured. For the average person living in Gaul, Spain, or Asia Minor, the reign of Tiberius was likely a period of peace, stability, and fair justice, a stark contrast to the chaos of the late Republic. So why the bad reputation? A lot of it comes down to his relationship with the Senate. Tiberius genuinely seemed to want to restore the Senate's authority and involve them in governing. He would bring matters to them for debate and referred to them as his partners in labor. But the senators, accustomed to Augustus's subtle autocracy, didn't know how to react. They were suspicious of his motives, and his blunt, humorless personality didn't help. When they offered him flattery, he rebuked them. When he asked for their honest opinion, they were often too scared to give it, fearing they would say the wrong thing. This created a cycle of misunderstanding and paranoia. Tiberius grew frustrated with their perceived servility, while the Senate grew terrified of his unpredictable moods. This toxic atmosphere in Rome, amplified by the political maneuvering of ambitious figures like Sejanus, is what dominates the historical accounts of Tacitus and Suetonius. They were writing from the perspective of the senatorial elite, and they recorded the fear and resentment that festered in the capital. In the end, Tiberius's story is a tale of two reigns. There is the Tiberius of the first decade, the diligent, methodical, and highly effective administrator who strengthened the foundations of the Roman Empire. He secured the finances, professionalized the government, and protected the provinces. He was, in many ways, the perfect man to follow Augustus, providing the substance and structure to back up Augustus's style and vision. Then there is the Tiberius of the later years, the isolated, suspicious ruler who withdrew from Rome, leaving the city in the hands of his treacherous Praetorian prefect, Sejanus, leading to the infamous treason trials that stained his legacy. But we must not let the darkness of his final years eclipse the achievements of the first. Without the unglamorous, painstaking work of Tiberius, the administrator, the peace and prosperity of the Pax Romana might have crumbled after Augustus's death. He wasn't charismatic, he wasn't popular, and he certainly wasn't a people person. But for a crucial period in its history, he was exactly the emperor Rome needed. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive into the complex character of Tiberius. It's a reminder that history is rarely black and white. If you found this perspective interesting, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more explorations into the figures who shaped the Roman world. We'd love to have you as part of our community. See you next time. Hello everyone, and welcome back to our series on the Roman Empire. Today, we're diving into Chapter 12, a story of military glory, political intrigue, and a rivalry that would shape the future of Rome. This is the tale of Germanicus and Tiberius, a classic clash between a popular general and a wary emperor. Imagine this. Rome is still reeling from the devastating loss of 3 legions in the Teutoburg forest. The Rhine frontier is a scar on the Roman psyche. Onto these stage steps Germanicus, the adopted son of Emperor Tiberius. He's charismatic, brave, and adored by the soldiers. He's everything a Roman hero is supposed to be, and he has one burning ambition: to avenge the fallen legions and restore Roman honor in the wild, dark forests of Germania. From 1416 ad, Germanicus leads a series of brilliant if brutal, campaigns across the Rhine. He's not just a commander, he's a soldier's soldier. He fights alongside his men, shares their hardships, and inspires fierce loyalty. His first major act is to quell a mutiny among the Rhine legions, not just with discipline, but with a powerful appeal to their duty and a promise of glory. The soldiers, who had been on the brink of revolt, are now ready to follow him anywhere. And follow him they do. Germanicus marches his armies deep into enemy territory. He finds the horrifying sight of the Teutoburg disaster, the bleached bones of Varus's legions still scattered on the ground. In a deeply emotional moment, he and his men give their fallen comrades a proper burial. This isn't just a military act, it's a profound statement. Rome doesn't forget its own. Fueled by this solemn duty, Germanicus relentlessly pursues the Germanic tribes, led by their charismatic chieftain, Arminius, the very man who had masterminded the Teutoburg ambush. The Romans and Germans clash in massive, bloody battles like I did. Germanicus manages to inflict heavy losses on the Germans and even captures Arminius's wife. Most symbolically, he recovers 2 of the 3 lost legionary eagles, the sacred standards that represented the very soul of the legions. For the Roman public, this was an incredible triumph. Songs were sung, and statues were planned. Germanicus was the hero of the hour. But while the people of Rome celebrated, someone in the imperial palace was watching with growing unease Emperor Tiberius. Now, the relationship between Tiberius and Germanicus is one of the great what-ifs of Roman history. On the surface, Tiberius was his adoptive father, his emperor. But beneath that, there was a current of suspicion and, dare we say, jealousy. Tiberius was a cautious, methodical ruler. He saw Germanicus's campaigns as risky, expensive, and ultimately not worth the cost in men and resources. Tiberius argued that the true border of the empire should be the Rhine. Pushing further into Germania was a dangerous gamble. Was he genuinely concerned for the stability of the empire? Or was he threatened by his popular, charismatic, and much younger heir? The sources, like the historian Tacitus, certainly lean towards the latter. They paint a picture of a gloomy, suspicious emperor watching his nephew's star rise too high, too fast. The adoration the public and the army had for Germanicus was a stark contrast to the reserved, often grim, demeanor of Tiberius. In an empire where a loyal army was the ultimate source of power, a popular general was a potential rival. So, in 16 AD, at the height of his success, Germanicus receives a message from Rome. It's from Tiberius. The emperor congratulates him on his victories, but recalls him to Rome. The official reason: to celebrate a magnificent triumph, and then take up a new, prestigious command in the east. The war in Germany, Tiberius declared, was over. Germanicus, ever. The loyal Roman obeys. He returns to Rome and celebrates one of the most spectacular triumphs the city had ever seen, parading his captured spoils and the recovered eagles before a cheering crowd. But was this a promotion or a political exile? By sending him to the eastern provinces, Tiberius was moving Germanicus far away from his loyal Rhine legions, the base of his power. It was a classic move of promoting someone sideways, out in the east. Germanicus was tasked with reorganizing the provinces of Syria and managing Rome's complex relationship with the Parthian Empire. He handled his duties with his usual skill, winning admiration from the local populations. And then, tragedy struck. In the year 19 AD, while in Antioch, Germanicus fell gravely ill. His health declined rapidly, and he died at the young age of 33. His death sent shockwaves through the empire. The public grief was immense. People mourned as if they had lost a brother or a son, but their grief quickly turned to suspicion and anger. On his deathbed, Germanicus himself was convinced he had been poisoned. He accused the governor of Syria, Gnaeus Calpurnius Piso, a known ally of Tiberius, who had been openly hostile to Germanicus. The implication was clear. Piso was acting on the emperor's orders. Were these just the paranoid delusions of a dying man, or was there truth to it? The death of Germanicus remains one of ancient Rome's greatest unsolved mysteries. Piso was put on trial back in Rome. The public was baying for his blood. The evidence was circumstantial, but the atmosphere was toxic. Before a verdict could be reached, Piso was found dead in his home, an apparent suicide. Did he take his own life out of guilt, or was he silenced to prevent him from implicating more powerful figures, perhaps even the emperor himself? We will never know for sure. What we do know is that Germanicus's death permanently damaged Tiberius's reputation. The shadow of suspicion never fully left him. It reinforced his image as a dark, paranoid ruler and deepened the rift between him and the Roman people. The story of Germanicus and Tiberius became a cautionary tale about the perilous relationship between an emperor and a popular general. It highlights a fundamental tension in the Roman imperial system, the need for successful military leaders to defend and expand the empire, versus the emperor's fear that those same leaders could use their popularity and military might to seize the throne for themselves. The legacy of Germanicus lived on, not just in the memory of the people, but through his children. His daughter, Agrippina, the younger, would become one of the most powerful women in Roman history, and his son, Gaius, would one day become emperor himself, better known to us by his childhood nickname, Caligula. And that's where we'll leave it for today. A story of glory, jealousy, and untimely death that reveals the fragile and often dangerous politics at the very heart of the Roman Empire. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey into the past. If you enjoyed this video and want to learn more, please hit that like button. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you won't miss our next chapter. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Do you think Tiberius was involved? Let's discuss. Until next time, stay curious. Upbeat, historical documentary style, music begins, then fades to the background. Hello and welcome back to our journey through the annals of Roman history. Today, we delve into a tale of ambition, power, and betrayal that could rival any modern political thriller. We're talking about the rise and fall of one of the most infamous figures in the early Roman Empire, Lucius Aelius Sejanus. So grab your seat, because this story is a masterclass in manipulation. Imagine ancient Rome, a sprawling metropolis at the heart of a vast empire. The emperor, Tiberius, is growing older, more reclusive, and increasingly suspicious of those around him. In this cauldron of political intrigue, one man saw an opportunity not just to serve, but to rule from the shadows. That man was Sejanus, the ambitious commander of the Praetorian Guard. Now, the Praetorian Guard wasn't just any military unit. They were the emperor's personal bodyguards, the elite of the elite, stationed right in the heart of Rome. Before Sejanus, their 9 cohorts were scattered throughout the city and nearby towns. Sejanus, with his characteristic cunning, persuaded Tiberius to consolidate them into a single, massive fortress just outside Rome's walls, the Castra Praetoriana. This single move was a stroke of genius. It didn't just improve the guards' discipline and efficiency. It concentrated their formidable power in one place, under one man's command. Suddenly Sejanus controlled the only significant military force in the capital. He went from being a bodyguard to the gatekeeper of Roman power. Born in the Etruscan town of Volsini, Sejanus was an equestrian, a knight, not a member of the old senatorial aristocracy. But what he lacked in noble lineage, he more than made up for in charisma, ruthlessness, and an uncanny ability to read people. The historian Tacitus described him as having a body capable of the hardest labors and a mind bold and crafty. He could appear modest while harboring boundless ambition. He was a master of disguise, projecting loyalty while weaving a web of conspiracy. Sejanus quickly became Tiberius's right-hand man. The aging emperor, weary of the backstabbing politics of the Senate and grieving the loss of his son, Drusus, found in Sejanus a confidant he could rely on. Tiberius called him the partner of my labors. He allowed statues of Sejanus to be erected throughout the city, some even placed next to his own. Coins were minted with their images side by side. For all intents and purposes, Sejanus was the core ruler of the Roman Empire. With the emperor's trust secured, Sejanus began to systematically eliminate his rivals. His ambition knew no bounds, and his ultimate goal was nothing less than the imperial throne itself. His first major target was Tiberius's own son and heir, Drusus the Younger. Drusus openly despised Sejanus and saw him for the threat he was. In a public argument, Drusus even struck This was a fatal mistake. Sejanus, ever the patient predator, didn't retaliate immediately. Instead, he seduced Drusus's wife, Livia, promising her marriage and a share of the imperial power. Together, they slowly poisoned Drusus, making his death in 23 AD look like the result of a long illness. Tiberius, devastated by the loss, leaned even more heavily on Sejanus for support, completely oblivious to his role in the tragedy. With Drusus out of the way, Sejanus set his sights on the remaining heirs, the sons of the celebrated General Germanicus and his wife. Agrippina, the elder Agrippina, was a formidable woman, a granddaughter of Augustus himself, and she fiercely protected her children's claim to the throne. She saw Sejanus as a low-born usurper and made no secret of her contempt. This made her and her family his primary obstacle. Sejanus began a campaign of whispers and accusations. He skillfully played on Tiberius's paranoia, convincing the emperor that Agrippina and her eldest son, Nero Caesar, were plotting against him. He used a network of spies and informants to build a case, twisting every word and action into evidence of treason. The atmosphere in Rome grew toxic with fear. No one felt safe. A careless word at a dinner party could lead to an accusation, a trial, and a death sentence. The infamous treason laws, originally meant to protect the state, were now weaponized by Sejanus to crush any and all opposition. Senators, nobles, and anyone perceived as a threat were systematically purged. The turning point came in 26 AD, worn down by the constant political battles and personal tragedies. And perhaps encouraged by Sejanus himself, Tiberius made a fateful decision. He retired from Rome to the island of Capri, a beautiful but isolated retreat in the Bay of Naples. He would never set foot in the capital again. This was exactly what Sejanus had been waiting for. With Tiberius gone, Sejanus was the de facto ruler of Rome. All communications to the emperor passed through him. He controlled access, filtered information, and issued orders in Tiberius's name. His power was now absolute. From his island fortress, Tiberius governed by letter, and Sejanus was his messenger, his eyes, and his ears. The purges intensified. Agrippina and her son Nero Caesar were arrested and exiled to remote, desolate islands, where they would eventually die under brutal conditions. Her second son, Drusus Caesar, was imprisoned in the dungeons of the Palatine Hill. Sejanus had methodically dismantled the imperial family, leaving only the young Caligula and his sisters, who were kept under close watch on Capri with Tiberius. By 31 AD, Sejanus was at the apex of his power. He held the consulship alongside the emperor, an unprecedented honor. He was betrothed to Livia, which would finally bring him into the imperial family. It seemed his final ascent to the throne was inevitable. But as the old saying goes, pride comes before a fall. Sejanus's arrogance had grown with his power, and he had made powerful enemies. The catalyst for his downfall came from an unexpected source. Antonia, the younger. She was the mother of Germanicus and Livia, a respected and influential figure in the imperial family. Having learned of Sejanus's plot to overthrow Tiberius and his role in her son Drusus's death, possibly from her own daughter-in-law Agrippina before her exile, or even from a repentant Livia, Antonia took a huge risk. She wrote a detailed letter to Tiberius, exposing the full extent of Sejanus's treachery. On Capri, Tiberius was finally forced to confront the terrible truth. The man he had trusted completely, the partner of his labors, had been playing him for a fool, orchestrating the destruction of his family and plotting his own demise. But Tiberius was no fool. He knew that a direct confrontation with Sejanus, who commanded the Praetorian Guard, would be suicidal. He had to move with the same cunning and secrecy that Sejanus himself had mastered. Tiberius devised an intricate plan. He appointed a new man, Naevius Sutorius Macro, as the new prefect of the Praetorian Guard, giving him secret orders. Then, he sent a long, deliberately ambiguous letter to the Senate. He began by praising Sejanus, hinting at even greater honors to come, perhaps the coveted tribunician power, which would effectively make him Sejanus summoned to the Senate to hear the letter read aloud, arrived beaming, expecting his ultimate triumph. The senators, eager to curry favor with the man of the hour, crowded around him with congratulations. As the letter was read, its tone began to shift. The praise became mixed with minor criticisms. Confusion rippled through the Senate. Then, at the very end, came the devastating blow. Tiberius denounced Sejanus as a traitor and ordered his immediate arrest. The senators, who moments before had been fawning over him, backed away in horror. Macro, having secured the loyalty of the Praetorian Guard and surrounded the Senate House with other loyal troops, moved in. Sejanus was arrested on the spot. What followed was a frenzy of revenge. The people of Rome, who had lived in fear of Sejanus for years, exploded in rage. His statues were torn down and smashed. The Senate, eager to prove their loyalty to Tiberius, condemned him to death without a formal trial. On that very same day, October 18th, 31 AD, Sejanus was strangled in prison, and his body was thrown onto the Gemonian stairs, where the enraged mob tore it to pieces. His reign of terror was over. The purge that followed was just as brutal as his own. His family, his children, and his known supporters were all hunted down and executed in a bloody wave of retribution. The story of Sejanus is a chilling reminder of how unchecked ambition can corrupt, and how quickly power can be lost. It shows a darker side of Tiberius's reign, one defined by paranoia and fear, largely of Sejanus's own making. This dramatic chapter in Roman history highlights the inherent instability of absolute power and the constant threat of betrayal that lurked just beneath the surface of imperial grandeur. Thank you so much for joining me for this deep dive into the world of Sejanus. I hope you found it as fascinating as I do. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, and do not forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you do not miss our next chapter in Roman history. Let me know in the comments what you think about Sejanus. Was he a brilliant strategist, or just a ruthless monster? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Until next time, stay curious. Welcome back to our journey through the annals of Rome. Today, we delve into one of the most enigmatic chapters in the life of an emperor, Tiberius' retreat to the island of Capri. Imagine this: the most powerful man in the world, the successor to Augustus, ruler of a vast empire, decides to leave the bustling, chaotic heart of power, Rome, for a secluded island. Why? What was he running from? Or what was he running to? B27 Tiberius was in his late 60s. He'd endured decades of political maneuvering, military campaigns, and personal tragedies. The city of Rome, with its endless senatorial squabbles and the constant pressure of public life, had worn him down. He felt a deep-seated weariness and a growing mistrust of those around him. The city he once commanded now felt like a cage. So, he made a decision that would stun the Roman world. He announced he was leaving Rome, initially under the pretext of dedicating temples in Campania, but he would never return. His final destination was Capri, a ruggedly beautiful island in the Bay of Naples. Capri was the perfect fortress. Its sheer limestone cliffs, plunging into the sea, made it easily defensible. From the heights of the island, one could see any approaching ship long before it arrived. Tiberius had a dozen villas built there, the most famous being the Villa Hobbies, the Villa of Jupiter. Perched atop the island's eastern peak, it was a palace in the sky, a command center from which he could rule the empire from a distance. It was a masterpiece of engineering, with vast cisterns to collect rainwater and a network of passages for servants, allowing the emperor his much-desired privacy. He had found his sanctuary, a place far from the prying eyes and grasping hands of the Roman elite. With Tiberius gone, a power vacuum emerged in Rome, and one man was perfectly positioned to fill it: Lucius alias as the Praetorian prefect. Sejanus was already Tiberius's most trusted advisor. Now, with the emperor physically absent, his influence became almost absolute. He controlled the flow of information to Capri, deciding who got to see the emperor and what messages were delivered. Letters and decrees would arrive in Rome, bearing Tiberius's seal, but many believed they carried Sejanus. He was the gatekeeper to the emperor, effectively the acting ruler of Rome. Sejanus used this power ruthlessly. He initiated a wave of treason trials, known as the *Majestus* trials, against his political rivals and wealthy senators whose fortunes he coveted. Accusations of plotting against the emperor, often based on flimsy evidence or outright fabrications, became commonplace. The atmosphere in Rome grew thick with fear and suspicion. No one felt safe. People whispered that Sejanus was methodically eliminating anyone who stood between him and the throne, including members of Tiberius's own family, the Julio-Claudian dynasty. The sons of Germanicus, Nero, and Drusus Caesar were targeted, arrested, and exiled, dying under grim circumstances. Sejanus was clearing the path, and it seemed Tiberius, isolated on his island, was either unaware or complicit. But what was Tiberius actually doing on Capri? This is where history blurs into legend. With the emperor hidden away, the rumor mill in Rome went into overdrive. The historian Suetonius, writing decades later, painted a lurid picture of Tiberius's life on the island. He described a secluded world of debauchery, a place where the aging emperor indulged in unspeakable acts, free from public judgment. These sensational stories, while making for gripping reading, are viewed with skepticism by many modern historians. They were likely a product of hostile propaganda, spread by his enemies in the Senate to tarnish his reputation. It's more plausible that Tiberius spent his days consumed by state affairs, reading, studying astrology, and nursing his deep-seated paranoia. He lived in a state of constant anxiety. He feared assassination plots and was haunted by the political machinations in Rome. The man who had sought peace on Capri had instead built himself a gilded cage, filled with suspicion. He communicated with the mainland via a series of signal fires, a testament to his need for control and his fear of what was happening beyond his line of sight. He wasn't living a life of leisure. He was a remote ruler, an emperor in self-imposed exile, trying to manage an empire through intermediaries he couldn't fully trust. The turning point came in 31 AD. Tiberius finally received a warning he could not ignore about Sejanus's ultimate ambition. His sister-in-law Antonia managed to smuggle a letter to him, detailing Sejanus's plot to seize power for himself. The illusion of his trusted friend was shattered. Tiberius, the old political master, moved with cold, calculated precision. He couldn't just order Sejanus's arrest. Sejanus commanded the Praetorian Guard, the only military force in Rome. A direct confrontation would lead to civil war, so Tiberius crafted a masterpiece of deception, sent a long, deliberately ambiguous letter to be read aloud in the Senate. The letter began with praise for Sejanus, leading him and his supporters to believe he was about to be granted even greater powers. But as the letter went on, the tone slowly shifted, weaving in minor criticisms, then more serious accusations, until it ended with a sudden, shocking order for his arrest. While the Senate was stunned into confusion, the new prefect of the Macro, who had carried the letter, secured the loyalty of the Praetorian Guard. Sejanus was seized, and the senators, sensing the shift in power, immediately turned on him. He was condemned, executed, and his body was torn apart by the enraged Roman mob. The fall of Sejanus unleashed a new wave of terror. Tiberius, his paranoia now fully justified, launched a brutal purge of anyone connected to the fallen prefect. The last years of his reign were dark, marked by executions and a climate of fear that surpassed even that. Under the man who had retreated to Capri to escape the ugliness of Roman politics had, in the end, unleashed its very worst aspects from his island fortress. He died in 37 AD, a bitter, isolated, and widely hated old man, leaving the empire in the hands of his grandnephew, Caligula. Tiberius's retreat to Capri remains a powerful story of power, paranoia, and the corrupting nature of absolute rule. Was he a monster indulging his darkest desires, as his enemies claimed? Or was he a weary ruler who, in trying to escape the political game, ended up being consumed by it? Perhaps the truth lies somewhere in the misty ambiguity that still shrouds the cliffs of Capri. Thank you so much for joining us on this exploration of Roman history. If you found this story as fascinating as I do, please hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the past. Let us know in the comments what you think about Tiberius's final years. We'll see you in the next video. Hello everyone, and welcome back to our deep dive into the life of Emperor Tiberius. Today, we arrive at the final, dramatic chapter of his story, his decline and death. We'll witness the spectacular fall of his most trusted confidant, explore his final, isolated years, and unravel the mystery surrounding his death. This is the culmination of a life marked by military genius, political savvy, and ultimately, a suffocating paranoia that would define his legacy. Let's begin with one of the most shocking betrayals in Roman history, the fall of Lucius Aelius. For years, Sejanus had been Tiberius's right-hand man, the commander of the Praetorian Guard, and the most powerful man in Rome next to the emperor himself. From his retreat on the island of Capri, Tiberius had delegated immense authority to Sejanus, who used it to eliminate his rivals and consolidate his power. He was, for all intents and purposes, the acting ruler of the empire. But Sejanus's ambition knew no bounds. He had designs on the throne itself, even seeking to marry into the imperial family. However, he had made powerful enemies, chief among them, Antonia the Younger, the mother of the future Emperor Claudius. It was Antonia who finally managed to get a message to the isolated Tiberius, warning him of Sejanus's treacherous plot to seize power. The news hit Tiberius like a thunderbolt. The man he had trusted implicitly was planning to betray him. But how do you topple someone who commands the city's only military force? Tiberius couldn't just issue a direct order. Sejanus controlled the flow of information in Rome. A direct confrontation would likely lead to a coup. So, Tiberius, the old political fox, devised a masterful and ruthless plan. Sent a long, rambling letter to the Senate. He appointed a man named Macro as the new commander of the Praetorian Guard, giving him secret instructions to take control of the barracks while the letter was being read. The letter itself was a work of art and manipulation. It began with praise for Sejanus, lulling him into a false sense of security. As the letter continued, it meandered through various topics, keeping everyone, especially Sejanus, on edge. Then, in the final paragraphs, the hammer fell. Tiberius denounced Sejanus as a traitor and ordered his immediate arrest. The senators, who minutes before had been congratulating Sejanus, scrambled to distance themselves. Panic erupted. Macro's new Praetorians, loyal to the emperor, surrounded the Senate house. Sejanus, who had walked in that morning as the most powerful man in Rome, was dragged away to prison. His trial was swift, his execution even swifter. The people of Rome, who had lived in fear of him, vented their fury, tearing down his statues and hunting down his supporters. It was a brutal and bloody end, a stark reminder of the deadly nature of Roman politics. The fall of Sejanus shattered what was left of Tiberius's trust in humanity. He had been betrayed by the person he thought was his most loyal friend. This event plunged him into an even deeper spiral of paranoia and isolation. He never returned to Rome, preferring the seclusion of his villas on Capri. From this island fortress, he ruled the empire through letters and decrees, his mind consumed by suspicion. His final years were marked by a reign of terror, largely driven by his fear of further conspiracies. The treason trials, which had already been a feature of his reign, intensified. Accusations, often baseless, flew wildly. Senators and wealthy citizens lived in constant fear of being denounced. A careless word or a perceived slight could lead to arrest, confiscation of property, and execution. The atmosphere in Rome was suffocating, filled with whispers and fear. Tiberius, once a respected general and administrator, was now seen as a remote and cruel tyrant, ruling from a distance. He grew increasingly reclusive, his physical health declining along with his mental state. The vibrant, commanding figure of his youth was gone, replaced by an old man haunted by ghosts of betrayal and consumed by mistrust. He became a figure of dread, a distant bogeyman whose whims could mean life or death for the empire's elite. It was a sad and lonely end for a man who had once held so much promise. Finally, in March of 37 CE, the end came. At the age of 77, while traveling in Campania, Tiberius fell gravely ill. The ancient sources give conflicting accounts of his final moments. According to some, he died of natural causes, but a more sensational and persistent story suggests his death was hastened. The story goes that Tiberius lapsed into a coma and was presumed dead. The court immediately began celebrating the accession of his chosen heir, Caligula. But then, to everyone's horror, a servant rushed in to announce that Tiberius was waking up and asking for food. Panic ends with, if Tiberius recovered, everyone who had prematurely celebrated his death would face his wrath. In this moment of crisis, the new Praetorian prefect, Macrota, same man who had helped bring down Sejanus, allegedly took matters into his own hands. He is said to have ordered the old emperor to be smothered with his own bedclothes, ensuring the transfer of power to Caligula was permanent. Whether this dramatic tale is true or simply a rumor designed to blacken his name, we'll never know for sure. What is certain is that on March 16th, 37 CE, the long and complex reign of Tiberius finally came to an end. So, how should we remember Tiberius? His legacy is a study in contrasts. On one hand, he was an undeniably skilled military commander and a prudent, efficient administrator. He left the empire financially secure and its borders well defended. He was not a profligate spender like some of his successors and generally managed the provinces with a steady hand. For the average person living far from Rome, his reign was likely a period of relative peace and stability. However, this positive side of his legacy is completely overshadowed by the darkness of his later years. He is remembered not as the competent ruler, but as the suspicious, reclusive tyrant of Capri. The fear, the treason trials, and the atmosphere of paranoia that gripped Rome have become his defining characteristics. He was a man who, embittered by personal tragedies and political betrayals, retreated from the world and ruled through fear. His story is a powerful cautionary tale about how suspicion and isolation can corrupt even the most capable of leaders, leaving behind a legacy not of achievement, but of tyranny. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey through the life of Emperor Tiberius. It's been a fascinating, complex, and often dark story. If you've enjoyed this series, please hit that like button and consider subscribing to the channel for more deep dives into history. Let me know in the comments who you'd like to see me cover next. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.